Welcome back. You hear Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about economic replaceability and what dictates your salary in the market. Well, the easy answer is what I just said. Well, consumerism and corporations and labor supply, those are all fine. But no matter how many times you try to delve into this question, it always seems to bubble up from the depths of neoliberal depravity. Those who, on the one hand, would be the harshest critics of the economic system, who point out its flaws, will still return to this safe pavilion. It's up to them. Well, that's just how it works. Whether you want to call it immoral or amoral, you say, because most Western governments in particular are diametrically opposed to their own citizens. They have an axe aimed at the next generation. Everything they do in terms of border policies, regulations, approach to the environment, consumerism, central banking. But we see a lot of the anti establishment folks. Oh, I guess that's just how it has to be. No, absolutely not. So let's break apart the crust a little bit and figure out what we can find. A first stop would be Hollywood, because after all, well, you pay celebrities more because they're popular and the market demands it. I could give you some credence back in the day when Hollywood was smaller and you legit had to be immeasurably talented to make it. Fred Astaire, he could act, he could dance, he could sing. That's on a totally different level. He probably was instrumental as well, many people at the time. You fast forward to even the 1980s, like a Tom Cruise. Are you telling me he's a great actor? Not especially. What happened is some producer or director gave him a shot, or potentially a back shot. I don't want to speculate too much, but we've heard the rumors. He was not discovered doing Shakespeare in the Park, and on a grassroots basis, consumers said, we want to see him in Top Gun, we want to see him in Mission Impossible. That's not actually how things play out in the entertainment industry. You might have recalled some years back that Han Solo movie. Alden Ehrenreich, he got selected even though he was a crappy actor. They had to get him an acting coach, for God's sake. Could it have something to do with his ethnicity, that he still had an opportunity? Regardless, how is a person getting this major role in a substantial franchise and he doesn't have a whole lot under his belt? He's not been favored by the audience. In truth, it doesn't matter. The industry chooses a person and puts them in front of the viewers enough times, and so you develop familiarity. And you say, okay, I might like this person. Maybe they draw in consumers, but that didn't come from the consumers themselves. That was essentially a air balloon. They floated to see what was going to be the reaction. And just as you can be immensely popular, you can be rapidly erased. Mel Gibson, tremendously talented. He's in Mad Max, the Lethal Weapon series. He directs Braveheart. He does The Patriot, We Were Soldiers, host of other films. He has his own production company. At his peak, he's worth like $800+ million. But then he makes a film that portrays the Care Bears in a negative light. And he's caught on tape saying what he truly thinks about people from the tribe. What happened to Mel Gibson? All his fandom, his money, his achievements went away, and he was in the doldrums for about 10 years despite all of that. Now, if the market decides, shouldn't Mel Gibson still have gotten roles and been an impressive filmmaker? But that's not what occurred. He was relegated to these Get the Gringo movie, Force of Nature, which that's a great one because it has other also rans, Emil Hirsch, Kate Bootiesworth, and she was one that her looks just went wigtail at some point. Now the Latina cop in that flick was pretty decent. But you're saying, what happened to Mel Gibson? The industry happened to Mel Gibson. He upset people who controlled his fate. So it's not truly consumerism, it is a syndicate that is choosing what you see in almost a psyop form. And he pushed it a little bit too far. But you say, well, but Mel Gibson's back now. How did he come back, though? Remember, his trad wife takes half his money. Then he's in a relationship with a Russian octomom. And if you ever listen to those voicemails, I was pretty blue-pilled at the time, but I was 100% Team Mel because I've experienced the same thing. Never, I was, say, reached that level of rage being recorded, but imagine someone you care about talking to you in a robot voice, dead fish, And they're doing this deliberately to manipulate you, which is precisely her goal. It's been said at times when they want to bring down a figure, they will send in a woman to do it. I know Saint Westernus Declinus, he made that observation about Monday, F.A. Monday, which, yeah, it was a talented guy. All of a sudden, he disappears once the woman comes on the scene. And it's so many instances. We talked about it with Human. I don't have to get on that rabbit trail. With Mel, his redemption arc began when Jodie Foster came. No, I meant it came from Jodie Foster. Ugh. So you've got this liberal feminist female who bats on the opposite side of the plate, and she gives him a role in the movie The Beaver. So it's symbolic. She is the empowered female having to reach down and rescue this vagabond, mentally unstable, racist white man from himself. In this movie, he plays an executive who's losing his career, he's schizophrenic, his family's falling apart, and he begins to cope by using a puppet beaver. And I don't have to tell you what a beaver symbolizes, but it happens to be quite hairy. This is all spiritual castration. He stepped out of line, now he has to make atonement, he has to make amends. And it doesn't stop there. People say, what about Hacksaw Ridge? So you take a person based upon a real life individual, this country Christian guy, anti-war, just wanted to save people's lives no matter who they were, and he doesn't just cast a Care Bear in that role, but he actually casts a giraffe cell Care Bear. So this is all important. He was able to come back into Hollywood only because he did the mea culpas, only because he went through a process of ritual humiliation. And never forget that. Another good example would be Elijah Wood. He's a successful child actor. He was actually in a film with Gibson, Forever Young, where Mel had a trad wife. He was eating her pie, and then she gets hit by a vehicle, and he becomes depressed, jumps inside a Yeti cooler for decades. But Elijah had other roles. He was Frodo Baggins in one of the biggest film franchises, recognized across the world. He played the guy in Spy Kids 3D, and all of a sudden, he's in Wilfred and everything is illuminated. These, I'm not going to say irrelevant films, but they don't have the same budget and appeal. Why is that? Well, Elijah started saying some things about Hollywood and people taking up the weehee to get roles. You know the stuff with Pound Me Too? Yeah, it was mainly women because they're sympathetic. I guarantee you a lot of these dudes wouldn't be surprised if Ryan Gosling was doing that. And who's the other one? Sydney Sweeney. Look at the face of that person and tell me if you think that's a biological female. I don't think it is. There's something off about the face. It should really be transvestigation, but that's for another video. The point I want to make with this, you can be immensely popular and talented and have a huge degree of exposure to an audience, but if the studios decide that you are persona non grata, you're not going to get the same roles, and you will devolve into irrelevance, whether you like it or not. Might be a little bit different now because you could try to push back with social media, but even social media is governed by algorithms. This goes to the objection when I pointed out, why are we paying OnlyFans people all this money? Why are they allowed to have great careers where they do no work or just make ass-shaking videos on YouTube? Oh, well, that's just because the market decides. No, as I just noted, there are algorithms that influence who's going to be seen. And that's why back in the day with YouTube, you could get more exposure even if you were speaking the truth, and then they clamp down on that. You see the stuff that's marketed towards men. Usually it's generic self-improvement, consumerism, get cars, cuck dance for women. This girl is Jen Stelter, so she was one of the early queens on Instagram. I didn't know this till recently. She's a member of the tribe. So if you think that all this is just happening by chance because organically people get a following, you could say the same thing about these folks that were big YouTubers and the algorithm decided no, and they got like 1 million subs and they're getting 30,000 views, if that, per video. So it's not so much the market decides, just like with Hollywood, they put it in front of you, and if you perform relatively well, you have familiarity, people will keep watching. The sexualization of the entire information age, that's one thing that back in the day was largely going to be restricted to certain websites, but Brother Elon just made it acceptable throughout X. So you were reading, I'm reading something about politics or history, all of a sudden, oh, look at me, I've got them in my profile. It's disgusting. It should not exist. But this is the kind of amoral response. Well, the market decides, but maybe not. Maybe they wouldn't be as successful if they weren't allowed to have this presence. And maybe that presence is because of the people who are running the economy. And maybe those people don't really care about the overall health and success of consumers, but just getting them hooked on something that's destructive from a young age. And should we be okay with that? Should we just keep saying, well, the market decided? Perhaps my favorite angle to this whole discourse would be CEOs. Well, naturally, they're paid more, they've got great expertise, and they deliver value to consumers and shareholders. Oh, really? So this fellow is known as Felix Steinapfel. He was in charge of Target for over a decade. During that time, he oversaw the disastrous attempted takeover of an online retailer that was far too costly. They expanded into Canada, and it was another hiccup because the Canadians were like, man, these taxes and prices are too high. So they kept dipping over the border to continue purchasing from American stores. And the consequence was that they had to shutter, it was 100 plus locations after tax loss of $4 billion. And there was the data breach, which then the company had to respond to that, provide discounts to people, their lawsuits. He leaves with a $61 million severance package after doing immense damage to the brand and the company. So, how does that figure in the market decides? Well, they had an agreement. Again, this is the problem. The structure itself is totally illogical. It's not market driven, it's elite driven, it's managerial driven. And that should be addressed. I got another fantastic example for you. This Edmondson guy was in charge of Radio Shack, and he basically scammed his way into the CEO's chair. He didn't have the qualifications he claimed. So they let him go, but even he got $1 million severance. So these are the whizzes, the egg sperms, the people that are doing everything right, that are smarter, and yet they are oftentimes just conniving scumbags. And they don't deliver value. They drive their companies into the ground. One could say with Jack Welch, people wrote all this stuff about how he saved GE. Yeah, by destroying the livelihoods of countless people. And then he left and he was grifting like a mother trucker, having them pay for his penthouse, I think a helicopter, $1 million a year pension. This is what we consider to be the market deciding, when in reality, it's just people at the top who are not being watched, who are not truly being held accountable, getting away with murder. So you can say the market decides, or your solution should be maybe it shouldn't. Maybe you should put like a 95% tax on gross profits from OnlyFans. Maybe you should mandate that corporations are loyal to the companies, or rather to the countries where they do the bulk of their business, and treat their workers well, not constantly try to sell them down the river. Well, yeah, but they wouldn't be able to compensate their CEO or their shareholders as much. Oh, big whoop, too bad. Or you can just sit there passively and say, well, the market decides, the market decides. This is actually how this society has been destroyed, because you've seen a lot of limited government types that have not objected to what corporations are doing, even while they keep hosing them with benefits, tax cuts, deregulation, offshoring. I think it's food for thought, if nothing else.